leaflet dropped on December 18th lists, in addition to El Zuhur, El Shabura, and Tal El Sultan as safe zones. Our investigation reveals that the IDF targeted those 3 areas after it told residents to head there. On January 9th, an airstrike in Tal El Sultan. The attack hits the home of the Nofal family there, killing 15.
A new NBC investigation finds that the Israeli Defense Forces would conduct airstrikes in areas that Palestinians in the Gaza Strip were specifically told to flee to for safety. They're referred to as safe zones. The only problem is oftentimes they didn't end up being safe at all. Now, their investigation specifically looked into 7 deadly airstrikes in the southern region of the enclave that had been designated as safe zones. And I want to give you a few specific examples that were provided. But first, how was this investigation conducted? Well, the crews compiled the GPS coordinates of each strike, all of which hit an area identified by the Israeli military as an evacuation zone in an online interactive map it published on December 1st. The map has not been updated since then, and the Israeli Defense Forces told NBC News in a statement Sunday that it remained accurate. So understand, this isn't a situation in which the IDF updated the information regarding where the actual safe zones are, and it's that Palestinians didn't see it. It's that the information never changed, even though there were airstrikes in the so-called safe zones. So keep in mind, by the way, they posted this information, this map of the safe zones online. Now imagine being in Gaza, dealing with aerial bombardments, but also with internet blackouts, which they've been dealing with in the Gaza Strip. You're not gonna be able to access that map to begin with. So even if the map was something that the IDF stayed true to, if they actually kept their promise of not bombing those so-called safe zones, there is some likelihood that Palestinians wouldn't even see the map or be able to access the map, given the fact that they don't have access to the internet oftentimes. The leaflets can be helpful, but I would venture to say they'd be even more helpful if they showed the safe zones that were actually safe. And again, NBC's investigation indicates that wasn't the case. So even if they evacuated to the areas deemed safe by the IDF, it's likely that they would either get severely injured or even possibly die from airstrikes. So as you saw in the earlier video, they gave you a specific example that I want to give you more information about. So on December 18th, the IDF dropped leaflets that identified Rafah's Tal al-Sultan and al-Zuhur neighborhoods, as well as al-Shabura, home to a large refugee camp, as safe, and told residents to go there. NBC News found that all 3 locations have been hit by airstrikes since then. Rafah's Tal al-Sultan neighborhood, which was designated safe in leaflets dropped by the IDF on December 18th, was targeted less than a month later on January 9th. Relatives said that 15 people died in that strike, and they belonged to, or they were in the Nofal family home when that strike happened. There are other examples that NBC News investigated and confirmed. I want to give you another example right now.
On February 12th, 2024, our crews filmed the aftermath of an airstrike on Al Shabura camp. They asked us to go to the Shabura area because it is safe. This is the safe area. Look around you. What happened? A man on the scene of the attack says. On April 20th at 10 p.m., also in the Shabura district, a building leveled. Among the dead brought to the hospital, a pregnant woman whose premature baby briefly survived, only to perish in the war it was born into.
So those types of stories are just gut-wrenching and difficult to process, but I do think it's important to give you more details about the victims in that strike and name the pregnant woman who lost her life and her infant who also lost their life. So among the dead were Sabrine Sakani, who was 30 weeks pregnant at the time. Her baby, Sabrine Alrur Jode, was born an orphan after doctors were able to perform a posthumous cesarean section and rescue her from her mother's lifeless body. But as you heard in that video, unfortunately, the infant did not survive. In yet another example, you have an infant dying. In this case, after the infant was delivered through a posthumous cesarean section. I can't imagine what it's like to perform something like that. But the child had respiratory issues and died. Now there's another example. This is yet another area, another safe zone that the NBC investigators looked into, and here's what they found.
On November 4th, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant says there's a safe zone which is located in Al-Mawazi, where there will be no strikes and anyone there will be in a safe place. But January 4th, 3 children die when their tent is hit in Al-Mawazi. NBC News documents this attack. The footage shows a crater and the hospital treating survivors. 14 people are killed.
So among those who were killed in that airstrike were 3 children. Their tent was hit by that airstrike. And so what is the IDF saying, right? How do they explain themselves, considering they have designated safe zones, they're communicating that with Palestinians? And by the way, that's one of the main defenses you'll hear toward the IDF. Oh, it's the most moral military. They're so moral. They let the population know, they let civilians know before they're gonna conduct an airstrike, which obviously is not the case. Well, you can't claim to be moral if you're telling people to flee to a specific area for safety, and then you proceed to do airstrikes that ends up killing civilians in the safe zone that you just designated. The IDF replied in an email that it was not aware of any strike at the provided coordinates and times for a March 26 strike on the Tal al-Zuhur neighborhood. It did not respond when asked about the 6 additional coordinates, but they did blame Hamas for the airstrikes. Not that Hamas carried out the airstrikes, of course, but that it was Hamas that was in that area that persuaded them to do the airstrikes or carry these airstrikes out. The IDF blamed Hamas for telling people to ignore directives to move. No, but obviously the Palestinian civilians did follow the directive. And they did move to the designated safe zones. And those safe zones were bombed anyway. And so put yourself in the shoes of a Palestinian. If you hear from, you hear from the IDF or the Israeli government telling you, okay, this is where you need to go in order to avoid, getting killed from shelling or from bombing. And then you hear that people keep getting killed in these safe zones. Are you going to listen to them? I wouldn't trust them. I wouldn't know what to do in this situation. We keep hearing these news stories about how the IDF is, any minute they're thinking about going into Rafah. They've already been doing airstrikes in Rafah. People are already getting killed in Rafah. It's happening right now as we speak. So my issue with this ongoing war isn't that I don't believe Israel has the right to defend itself. It's specifically military operations like this that I have a problem with. And I hate that binary thinking because it's so dishonest. Okay, the binary thinking is either Israel does nothing and they allow Hamas to act with impunity, considering what happened on October 7th, or Israel has a right to defend itself and it gets to do whatever it wants. No, those aren't the only 2 options. And that's what I've been trying to communicate to people. There are ways to carry out this war that actually demonstrates some concern for innocent civilians who have done nothing wrong. And it's stories like this and it's investigations like this that make it abundantly clear to me that they're not going out of their way and they're not working hard to protect civilians as they're going after Hamas. When you tell people to go to a designated safe zone and then you bomb that safe zone anyway, you lose the moral high ground. So when you see the students on these campuses who are, outraged about what's happening, when you see the protests, yeah, there might be a few people who say dumb, unhinged things and they should be condemned. But the majority of people are seeing these types of military operations, and this is what they have a problem with. By the way, the IDF not only blamed Hamas, saying that Hamas is telling people to ignore the directives to move, it said in a follow-up email that it would act against Hamas wherever it operates with full commitment to international law. They seriously said that, while distinguishing between terrorists and civilians. I'm also a little bit tired of the lies, because obviously this particular story makes it clear that they are not showing that they're distinguishing between terrorists and civilians. Finally, I want to end on this. So Senator Bernie Sanders, who is a strong critic of Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, does in fact hesitate in referring to what's happening in Gaza as a genocide. And that might bother some of you, but he did have some pretty strong words in regard to what he believes is happening in Gaza as we speak. Let's watch.
And I think the word genocide is something that is being determined by the International Court of Justice. But this is what I will say. I don't think there's any doubt that what Netanyahu is doing now, displacing 80% of the population in Gaza, is ethnic cleansing. That's what it is, pushing out huge numbers of people. And now we're looking at the possibility of an attack on Rafah, where people have gone for so-called as a safety zone. So what's going on there, again, to my mind, is outrageous. And as you've indicated, I strongly oppose US funding for Netanyahu's war machine.
And if you guys can recall, in the very beginning, when Israel was carrying out its response to the atrocities that were committed on October 7th, there were some hardliners on the left who were disturbed at Bernie Sanders' support for what Israel was doing. That was the very beginning. And it was because Sanders believed, and I believed as well, that Israel absolutely had the right to go after Hamas after what happened on October 7th. But they lost the moral high ground because of situations like this, the bombing of safe zones, the unwillingness to allow enough humanitarian aid to enter the region, the complete leveling of the Gaza Strip, the complete destruction of its infrastructure, residential buildings, the fact that they know Rafah now has more than 1 million displaced Palestinians sheltering there for safety, even though now it's also dealing with airstrikes. But they're planning on doing more and intensifying these attacks. The unwillingness to support a two-state solution, which I will admit, after all of this, it seems like an impossibility. But you have Netanyahu bragging about the fact that he served as an obstacle to developing a two-state solution, that he funded and propped up the very group that he's now fighting against, Hamas. He funded Hamas, and that never gets any attention. So it's a lot more nuanced than Israel either does nothing or Israel gets to do whatever it wants. The truth really lies in the middle. And if there was any real indication that the IDF was looking to protect civilians to the best of their ability, we would be having a completely different conversation right now. But that's just not what's happening. And that's where the issue lies.